Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. They say that if you're a liar, you've got to have a good memory. And that's true for small lies, relatively small lies. But with something like 9/11, you'd got to be a lot better than having just a good memory. It's a big, big thing, 9/11. We've heard about the towers. That's just one part of the story. There's the hijackers, there's just so much to it. If you follow the official story of the plot through, you run into a huge evidence trail which has to be obscured or lied about or somehow explained. It's not just a matter of having a good memory. There are multiple errors in the official 9/11 story. And what I've come here to do today is basically to talk about the issue that's known as the 28 pages issue. I'm sure everybody here has heard of that. There's a lot of talk in Washington now about the allegation that Saudi Arabia was in some way behind the 9/11 attacks. Now, some people are going to say, oh, that's just a limited hangout. Or, no, it wasn't Saudi Arabia, it was Israel, or whatever. Now, I'm not really here to say what is definite. I'm just here to report on what's going on, because I think it's actually quite good news for us in the 9/11 truth community. And I'll address the first objection first, which is that it wasn't Saudi Arabia, it was Israel. Well, I wouldn't have done it. If I'd been Israel, I would have been very happy to have my people in the Oval Office. I certainly would not want to have my operatives doing a 9/11 organizing a 9/11 attack in defiance of the whole American establishment, the whole American military, standing down the military. How did they do that? So it might well be the case that Israel was behind 9/11, but it wouldn't have been through manipulating things on the ground. It would have been using their allies in the CIA to carry out the 9/11 attacks for them, so you get to the CIA rather than Israel. Now, as for Saudi Arabia, that's just a limited hangout. Of course it's a limited hangout. You don't expect them to come out with the whole story on day one, even if they want to. The point is that you have to pull threads, and if you pull the Saudi Arabia thread, you very quickly get through to the CIA thread, which is where the plot almost certainly was carried out from. All we can do is to push, and in a way, although I don't disagree with what David just said, in a way it's not really the facts that matter. Martin Summers, who's addressed these meetings before, is quite a wise observer, a wise and cynical observer of Western politics. He's always said that 9/11 truth would only come out when a faction in the ruling elite decided that it was in its interest that 9/11 truth should come out. So really, in a way, it's not so much the strength of the evidence as the power which the investigation which we want is going to have. Will they have subpoena powers? Will they have planted patsies in them who are just going to come up with a whitewash like inquiries usually do? That's, I think, more of a power question, really. And it's not a matter of, oh, don't do this. That's not the way to look at it, in my opinion. So I think we can just follow the evidence step by step. And at the moment, there's quite a lot of evidence coming out about the Saudi Arabian role. Just to make it clear, the other roles that haven't come out that I won't be talking about are the Pakistani role, the British role, although actually I have got a little teaser. Apparently Prince Charles, according to a current rumour, has got a connection to 9/11, which I'll come to at the end. It's just unproven at the moment. So really what we're talking about is a crime, in my opinion, by a rogue network of people centered on the CIA, but taking support from its members in various other institutions. So for instance, the Pakistani ISI, maybe Mossad had a role in watching the hijackers. They seem to have done, actually. You've got the British government. They didn't all know about it, but I dare say one or two of them were involved. There's quite a lot of evidence pointing to that. So, let's forget the model of, was it the CIA, was it Mossad, was it France, Britain, America? No, it was a criminal conspiracy with key members in key positions across a whole range, a very wide range of institutions. But that doesn't mean that the average person in that institution is in any way guilty or even knew about it. They're probably guilty, many of them are now guilty of silence afterwards, complicity after the event, but that's a different issue. So we've got a network paradigm here, in my opinion, not an institutional paradigm. And that explains why so many people in the mainstream don't hear our message. Because when you say, I think rogue elements in the CIA might have carried out 9/11, they're going to say, oh no, how could the CIA, we'd have heard about it. If the whole of the CIA knew about 9/11, then we'd have heard about it by now. And of course they're quite right, they would have done, but it wasn't. It's simple really, but people do need to understand that. There's a lot of cross discussions on that, and a lot of misunderstandings with people in the mainstream who don't understand the nature of crime. 9/11, in a way, is a criminological issue rather than a political issue, and certainly more than being a journalistic issue. And the problem is to educate people who are willing to be educated in the mainstream of that point, that we're not saying whole institutions are guilty, Mossad's guilty, the CIA is guilty. Most people in the CIA are actually just read newspapers. That's what most intelligence, so-called intelligence work is. They just read newspapers and file them off and summarize them and send reports in. And that's all they do. They don't have anything to do with the dirty tricks. It's just a small part of the CIA. And even within that, the people who organized 9/11 are an even smaller part. The counterterrorism center of the CIA is where it was all centered on, in my judgment. There's a lot of speculation here in this talk I'm giving, and I'm not speaking on behalf of Reinvestigate 9/11, by the way. Something's changed in Washington. Here are some of the things that have changed are Donald Trump, for reasons of his own, has started to talk about 9/11, about what brought the towers down. In his way, he's opened up the whole agenda. A lot of us don't much like Donald Trump, but we've got to face facts that a lot of 9/11 truthers are, what we might call American rednecks who Donald Trump gets on with, and he's addressed them, and he's validated now. He actually had a speaker, a heckler, who he pulled up in front of everybody and said, this 9/11 truther is one of us, so that's changed. The Saudis are out of fashion. People are a little bit worried about the ghastly mayhem created by our arms in Yemen, something which the mainstream media has more or less managed to keep off the agenda, but is an absolutely appalling, ongoing war crime with the full support of all the usual suspects. David Cameron particularly has been supplying arms and renewing their expended arms, I believe, which have gone on a lot of dead civilians in Yemen. We've got the 15-year anniversary of 9/11 coming up, and the media loves anniversaries. We've got and that's all really come out in this issue of the 28 pages, which, in case it wasn't 28 pages of the 9/11 Commission, which the BBC thinks. It was 28 pages of a prior investigation by the US Congress, which was much more hostile to the authorities than the 9/11 Commission was. So a lot of what's coming out is actually stuff that we knew about years and years and years ago, but the mainstream media haven't reported, and which therefore the public doesn't know about and is in a sense new. The 9/11 commissioners are sort of playing it hot and cold. They're saying, well, there were unanswered questions which we would have liked to have looked into if we'd had time, but then they're saying at the same time, actually we did look into it and none of these issues about Saudi Arabia are justified. So you've got, for instance, Zellicoe, who was the sort of key, cover-upper in the 9/11 Commission. He said that there are some things about the 9/11 attacks that even the government doesn't know. To this day, I don't quite know what the real story is, he said. We said what we said in the Commission report. When we said that this needs more work, that was a big thing for us to say. So basically, they're making a stake. The old 9/11 cover-up team are making a claim to run the next investigation so that they can cover up any more stuff that in their judgment needs covering up. And in a sense, I think, here's a quote from the LA Times. I've got quite a few quotes here, actually. The LA Times said, implicit in this dispute is an issue of even greater moment. Who ultimately exercises jurisdiction over the truth? The demands for the declassification of the 28 pages also call into question the establishment's very authority to control that narrative. And that is really what the battle is about. It's a battle about who's got jurisdiction over the truth. And the great thing about wars, from the establishment point of view, is they can keep everything secret and they let out the truth. Well, not the truth, they claim it's the truth, they let it out to their friends in the media, and in exchange for being a conduit for lies, you get promotion in the media because you've got hot sources in the opinion of your editors. It's a very sick little system. But listen to what Zelikow also went on to say. At that time and today, I believe KSM, the alleged ringleader of the 9/11 attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, I believe KSM has never told people what he knows about this, Zelikow told NBC News. Now, to me, that shows that they're in trouble. That is the stupidest thing. KSM, according to the official story, was waterboarded something like 150 times. Now, I've got grave doubts about whether KSM was ever anything but an American agent, now living quite comfortably in Guantanamo Bay. That's just a little theory of mine. But the point is, according to the official story, KSM certainly told them everything. You don't survive, months of torture by the CIA and keep huge amounts of things secret. I don't think you do, anyway. So that's how much trouble they're in. So now in the mainstream media, we've got some quite interesting developments. Huffington Post was never a friend of 9/11 Truth. I think, when it was sold from Arianna Huffington to one of the American big media corporations, I suspect, the deal was that they don't go beyond what the mainstream allows. So what have we got? We've got one of the Jersey Girls, one of the victims, activist campaigners for the truth, a woman by the name of Kristen Breitweiser. And this is what she said in response to Philip Zelikow and the 9/11 Commission. As reported and documented in the New York Times national security correspondent Philip Shannon's book, The Commission, Staff Director of the 9/11 Commission, Philip Zelikow, actively worked against any thorough investigation into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and its role in the 9/11 attacks. Actively worked against. For lawyers, that's code for complicity and possible prosecution. And this is Kirsten Breitweiser, so when two Commission staffers were brought over to the 9/11 Commission. So when two of the staffers who brought out the 28 pages saying that Saudi Arabia was complicit in the 9/11 attacks, when the two staffers came into the 9/11 Commission, they were blocked by Zelikow. Zelikow fired one investigator when she tried to access the 28 pages as part of her further investigation and work for the Commission. So you've got the commissioners saying in public, just give us the job and we'll do a bit more research. We never had time to research it. You've got the Huffington Post, which is part of the magic circle of establishment media, carrying this, what we knew, of course, years ago, but they, for the first time into the American mainstream, carrying the fact that the 9/11 Commission was a dishonest, corrupt cover-up, and that these guys are actually potentially prosecutable for being accessories after the fact. So I think, things are happening, in my opinion, in America. Sorry, this isn't terribly well prepared. Bob Graham Now, by the way, if you don't follow American politics that much, there's Bob Graham, who was the Florida Democratic senator at the time of 9/11. There's Lindsey Graham, who's an absolutely disgustingly odious, fascistic warmonger amongst the Republicans. So please don't, let's be clear about that we're talking about Bob Graham here. Bob Graham has spoken about active deceit by the FBI, and I would add on orders from their controllers from the CIA, FBI top brass. Active deceit, not just withholding information, but uttering false information into the public domain. That's quite a serious charge, actually. You're definitely going to lose your job for that if that's ever upheld, and possibly once again face a criminal prosecution for being an accessory after the fact. Bob Graham asked if, let's see if I got the quote here. Graham was asked on the CBS flagship program 60 Minutes. That's what broke this 28 pages issue, by the way. And when we say the Saudis, do you mean the government, rich people in the country, charities? All of the above, says Graham. He's probably the biggest expert on 9/11 within the American establishment. He's saying, yes, the Saudi government was complicit. The government was complicit, not just individuals, not just Prince Bandar, who, has been associated with all this. I don't think I'm going to have time to get into Prince Bandar today. So there we are, Bob Graham, all of the above. Another line of investigation has been the... just before I start talking about the alleged hijackers, I'll just mention that if I talk about the hijackers, or if anybody does in the 9/11 Truth Movement, it doesn't necessarily mean that there even were any hijackers on the planes. It certainly doesn't mean that the hijackers were piloting the planes, because they couldn't have done, at least some of them. But to create the official narrative, there's got to be some hijackers. Now, it's probably more accurate to call them patsies, the people who were named as hijackers. But let's just be clear. I'm not adding my voice to the view that there really were hijackers really flying planes. I'm not taking any position on that. I'm just talking about the hijackers as people in a script that was written by the CIA. They may have been drug dealers. They may have been genuine jihadists. We don't know at this stage. But we know who the named people were. Now, they were supported. The key allegation is that these people were supported by the Saudi embassy in Washington, actively supported. And there's been another line of investigation and another set of lies are becoming more and more clear in America concerning another of the support groups, support cells for the alleged 9/11 hijackers. The FBI lied to a judge and said they had no information about this support cell in Sarasota, Florida. They eventually produced 80,000 documents, which that judge is now going through, and at some point that judge is going to come out with his conclusions about that. So yet again, we've got a legal sort of, I wouldn't say a pincer movement, but definitely the noose is slightly tightening around the organizers of the 9/11 attacks in the CIA. And I think let's just quickly name the key people in our little criminal network. We've got John Brennan. He's currently the CIA boss, and he's been the key guy to keep everything covered up as much as possible during the Obama presidency. He moved from the CIA to being Obama's national security advisor, which is like the key minder, the guy who's there to make sure Obama doesn't make any promises that they don't want him to make, or reveal anything, or appoint anybody. Brennan was CIA station chief in Saudi Arabia in the run-up to the 9/11 attacks. It's a very small world, the 9/11 world in the CIA. You've just got a handful of people who pop up again and again and again. There's only really, I dare say there's barely more than about 10 of them. So that's Brennan. You've got George Tenet, who was the CIA chief at the time of 9/11. The most noticeable thing about him was that he swore on oath that he had not visited Bush in August prior to the 9/11 attacks, when, in my opinion, that was the final planning meeting. George Tenet told the 9/11 Commission on oath that he hadn't met up with George Bush in August. It turned out he'd taken a plane flight from Washington. I mean, wouldn't that just almost be enough to have somebody in the dock for perjury? I mean, it was perjury. I mean, has he really got such a bad memory? I thought for a while, well, maybe he's developing Alzheimer's. I'll just keep an eye on him. I haven't heard anything about him, but he must have terrible Alzheimer's by now if he was forgetting about a plane flight he took only a few months earlier on oath. So, Tenet we've got, very high up in the suspects list, very dodgy character. Then we've got Kofor Black. Well, he was in charge of the Osama bin Laden unit at the CIA. Remember how they said, this all came as a surprise to us. We lost contact with Afghanistan. We never had imagined anything like this. And then it turned out, several years later, they had 100 CIA agents, not operatives, not sort of assets, agents, senior people, 100 CIA people in a unit dedicated to Osama bin Laden, a unit that was set up in 1996. So, and then what happens to Kofor Black? Oh, well, it turns out he's a big favorite of George Bush, President Bush's, and he's in the White House a few weeks later advocating the use of torture. Well, of course, torture is very useful when you want to create a false story. This is something that, people often haven't quite understood about torture and why they needed it, because they had to get all these people from Al-Qaeda in to make the story stand up, and then they had to get them to say the right things. So, that's why you need the torture. It's a very important part of the 9/11 plot. And then you've got David Edger, the Berlin station chief. He's named in my book, and we've got a little fuzzy little picture of him, which was the best I could find. But he was presumably in charge of the so-called 9/11 ringleaders, who didn't come from Saudi Arabia. They came basically from Germany. They were all the key months, prior to 9/11. Were Mohammed Atta and his friends in Germany, and David Edger was, and it's very uncomfortable when you look at his career prospect, but he suddenly pops up in the most surprising way as CIA station chief in the run-up to 9/11, and then he retires. And then, of course, you've got Prince Bandar from Saudi Arabia, who's a close friend of Bush. The money trail, that's always something that people like to look at. It's well known as a giveaway. And of course, we had the case, we probably mostly remember how Michael Meacher in The Guardian drew attention to the $100,000 which the Pakistani intelligence chief had mailed through to Mohammed Atta in the months before 9/11. But that's not the only money trail. There's another money trail of the money which Prince Bandar's embassy, the Saudi embassy in Washington, passed on to the people in America who on their behalf were organizing the 9/11 hijackers, alleged hijackers. So that's two money trails, and I'll get to the third one just at the very end. But I think what's most significant, or what might turn out to be most significant, is that the ordinary guys at ground level at the FBI, they'd got onto the 9/11 plot before it happened. They sort of knew that something like that was going to happen. Now, the official story says it's as simple as that. We would say they got onto the false trail that was being manufactured, the false legends of the hijackers that was being manufactured. But for one, that doesn't really matter at this point. Many people in the FBI had tried to stop the 9/11 attacks by trying to stop the hijackers who they had identified. That much we know. And that's been, one after another, these whistleblowers have come forward, starting with Colleen Rowley, who was Woman of the Year in Time magazine. for her whistleblowing, but they just get ignored by the media because it's so damning, the evidence that they've got. Well, now more of them have started talking, and they've started talking to, of all places, the New York Post, which is, you know, about as objectionable to many people here as Donald Trump is. It's Murdoch-owned, and I think, you know, it's only because the Saudis are out of favor in America that the New York Post is running this. But I'm just going to read out an article from the New York Post because I never believed that I'd ever read anything like this. Paul Sperry. The kingdom's involvement was deliberately covered up at the highest level of our government, and the cover-up goes beyond locking up 28 pages of the Saudi report in a vault in the US Capitol basement. Investigations were throttled. Co-conspirators were let off the hook. Case agents I've interviewed at the Joint Terrorism Task Forces in Washington and San Diego say virtually every road led back to the Saudi embassy in Washington, as well as the Saudi consulate in Los Angeles. Yet time and time again, they were called off from pursuing leads. A common excuse was diplomatic immunity. Some information has leaked from the redacted section, including a flurry of pre-9/11 phone calls between one of the hijackers, Saudi handlers in San Diego, and the Saudi embassy. That to me is totally new information, actually. So I think there's a lot of very damaging new information queuing up to come out. And the transfer of some $130,000 from then Saudi ambassador Prince Bandar's family checking account to yet another of the hijackers, Saudi handlers in San Diego. Prince Bandar's checking account goes straight into the 9/11 plot, as does the $100,000 from Pakistan. Now listen to this. This is, okay, there's a little bit of journalistic code here, but I don't think anybody can misunderstand if they read this carefully. After he met on September the 13th, 2001, with President Bush in the White House, where the two old family friends shared cigars on the Truman balcony, the FBI evacuated dozens of Saudi Arabian officials from multiple cities. Two old family friends shared cigars on the Truman balcony of the White House 2 days after 9/11. Well, you know, how much further do we need to go? Well, let me just tell you now a document I received just a couple of days ago via the Sunday Express, which, as you probably know, is taking an interest in 9/11, and they gave a very sympathetic interview to Matt, who lost his brother in the 9/11 attacks. So the Sunday Express, in the sense, is on our side. But what they're saying is that the slush fund, hang on, I'll start from the beginning. This is my last thing I'm going to say, by the way. There was a famous arms deal years ago between Britain and Saudi Arabia called the Yamama deal. It involved billions and billions of pounds worth of arms shipments to Saudi Arabia. Associated with it was a slush fund, because the Saudis don't do anything if there isn't a slush fund for their own personal benefit. So basically, BAE Systems in Britain were being paid money by the Saudis, and then I suppose they were paying it off into the slush fund, which was run by Prince Bandar. Now, the allegation is that the money went from the slush fund to Prince Bandar's checking account, which we've just heard about, sent the money on to the 9/11 hijackers. So we've got quite an interesting money trail there. And then finally, we've got the guy who helped negotiate with his fellow royal, Prince Bandar, who helped negotiate the Yamama deal, because yes, it was Prince Bandar, later in Washington sharing the cigar with Bush, known as Bandar Bush, actually, because he's such a friend of the Bush family. We've got Can we guess who were called into this allegation? I just mention this because you heard this here first. I don't think it's been public at all anywhere. It may not even be true, but I think it probably is. The guy who helped oversee the Yamama negotiations was apparently none other than Prince Charles, because the royals like to sort of do things with each other, and it helps keep everything cool, if there's a royal involved, because it means that they're going to be above. Sure enough, when it came to an investigation into the slush fund, the Serious Fraud Office were right on the case. They were making a lot of progress. The leaks were coming out that, yes, there was going to be prosecutions. And what happened? Oh dear, Tony Blair used his powers of royal prerogative to quash the investigation. And somewhere, hopefully, it's all there in a basement to be dug up by the future investigation which we seek. Thank you very much.